Okay, Amanda, thanks so much for agreeing on experimenting with me with these ideas of having quick chats that I post in my newsletter. It's a new experiment. I'm really glad that you agreed to do that. Thank you. So the impetus behind this, as you know, is something that you posted in LinkedIn that really resonated with me. So I think you were referring to I think that was the main Tableau conference, and you saw a presentation, and you had a really interesting comment about AI, right? And how AI is impacting the world of data and data visualization. So I'll quickly read what you posted, and then we can start, I guess. So I think at some point you said, I keep seeing this massive sense of urgency around AI, with a framing of AI data driving what we do. I don't just want, and this is the important part, I don't just want humans in the loop on how we integrate AI into our data work. I want people in the driver's seat. I want data informed and data enabled decision making, not data driven decision making. Wow, that's pretty strong. But I
It was
agree.
it was it was the Tableau keynote that they shared this with. They were doing it. They were sharing out insights from some a customer survey they had done. I think surveying, I think it was like 1,000 customers or leaders in the field, and asking them about some of the impacts of AI and the impacts of how we're using data. So there were some stats they were sharing out, and I always get cheeky about the language we use, right? I
Yeah.
think language is powerful, and the way we talk about the role of data in our work and the role of data in the world is really important, especially as we think about the increasingly conversational ways you can engage with AI based tools like ChatGPT. And so I have for a long time been willing to stand on a soapbox and say that I dislike the phrase data driven, because it does feel like we are ceding control to some amorphous set of numbers to make choices for us. And the information I think that we bring as people, and we're analyzing data, all the context, all the awareness of different things that might be happening in our community, in our company, those are things that are really valuable for interpreting and making better use of data and information. And so I'm a big fan of that, looking for that shift of like data enabled, data informed. Like I want those kind of decisions to be made using data, but without saying it has to be led by and driven by data specifically.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because that was a problem even before the
Mm-hmm.
latest trends in AI, and now this is even amplified, because there's this idea that you could, if it was intelligent enough, then the human would be out of the equation, and you could just make decisions or discoveries, right? Now you also have this kind of artificial intelligence that can do certain things, and what is our role in there? So there seems to be like this push to eliminate the human.
Sure. I mean,
Um,
it's so cool how AI can break down barriers to people engaging with information, right? I think
yeah,
there's a lot you've written about and explored in terms of the ways that AI enables us to kind of dive into and get through massive amounts of text-based data without having to read every word and see patterns and feedback. And that can be really helpful. Uh, I also am a big fan of finding ways that AI enables our work in ways that we're excited about using it, rather than taking away the parts that we find joy in. So, I mean, the less data driven example, data driven. See, there you go. The less data led example of like what this looks like is thinking about kind of how we use it in our work. And I think about the fact that we're doing a barbecue this weekend for Memorial Day, and my husband sent me an AI generated shopping list this morning that he had AI generate. And I really enjoy cooking a lot. And let me tell you that the ingredients it was recommending for potato salad for 12 was not the potato salad that I would make. And so I enjoy cooking. I enjoy doing those things. And so using AI as a tool where I have other context to say, I don't want to make a potato salad that includes a cup of yellow mustard, rather than letting it make those decisions for me and thinking about what it is I actually want to serve and want to eat. I mean, I bring extra context to that kind of use of AI as a tool. I think it's not dissimilar to when we're thinking about using AI as a brainstorming tool or a place to start from or kind of explore and do initial analysis. I think it's valuable there. I think it's less useful as a tool that makes decisions for us or we think can do everything for us. mean, I think I think I'd shared this a while back also on LinkedIn, but we did part of our state of the industry survey this past year. So the 2023 DVS State of the Industry Survey, the Data Visualization Society, for
Hmm.
folks who might
Hmm.
not know us.
Yeah.
And when we did that, we asked people about their use of AI as a tool in terms
Hmm.
of their use of AI in their data viz work. And only about a quarter of the people who responded. Again, think about context. This is
Yeah.
October of 2023. I think
Yeah.
that number would probably have changed in 6 months for sure,
Of
since that was
course.
right when ChatGPT was really coming out. Said
Yeah.
they used AI in their data viz work, but the
Interesting.
majority of those folks were using it for data prep and data cleaning. How do I kind of create greater efficiencies in the parts of my work that have logical checks to them or can be automated or semi-automated? Not necessarily using it as much for the world of like task management or actually producing and refining data visualizations. So I think as we think about the role of AI in our workflows in our space, I think we're seeing it more as an enablement tool, I hope, and a kind
Yeah.
of co-pilot, which is how it's been framed and branded by Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
Rather than being the thing that's in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
But it's so much more conversational and seems so much
Right.
more capable.
Yes.
So and
Yes.
it breaks
Yes.
down those data literacy barriers. So I think it can be tempting to let it go ahead and make decisions for us to simplify and reduce some decision fatigue. But they're not always good
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah. I'm particularly excited about the AI helping us with the most menial tasks, right? I think that's a really good application, right? I don't want to spend more time writing regular expressions, right?
Sure.
Or, I mean, I don't think I would lose anything if an AI writes regular expressions for me, or I don't know, rearranges or computes columns in a spreadsheet. I think that's a great application of AI. I think it becomes murkier when you get to um, higher level cognitive processes, I would
Hmm.
say.
Well,
Sorry, I think I
it's tricky.
interrupted you. You were about to say something.
Well, and it's tricky too on like what kind of decisions are we making, right? So when
Yeah.
you think about data and information that goes into something, I mean, I work primarily in public health and healthcare. And so AI opportunities for enabling better, faster decisions by giving doctors recommendations because it has the ability to look through whole tranches of case files and information and give you and use as a decision support tool. That's decision support, right? Not
Support.
decision making, decision support tool
Yeah,
could be fantastic and has the
I
potential
agree.
for potentially improving kind of overall health outcomes or even saving lives. Using AI as a tool for optimizing supply chains and looking for hidden inefficiencies and how drugs or materials are getting to different places, especially in low resource environments, could be massively powerful. But the stakes are a lot higher for when you get one of those decisions wrong. And so I think we have to look at kind of the net game on there are net gains to AI
Yeah,
enablement in terms of maybe better health outcomes and decisions. There are also spaces where bringing AI into the picture actually can have some really disastrous consequences if it makes an incorrect recommendation that might lead someone down a path that they may not otherwise clinically follow. And that's where I think like thinking about having physicians or other clinical care providers using AI as an enablement tool, but not as a decision making tool. I mean, comes
yeah,
back to that language component. And the more
yeah,
we talk about AI as decision support and enablement and that co pilot piece, I think the more we reinforce the fact that we still do value people being in that driver's seat of making those kind of decisions. And in the world of data visualization, maybe the stakes are a little bit lower in terms of how good our charts look or don't look. But I mean, even at the Tableau conference where I kind of sent that cheeky tweet from or cheeky LinkedIn post from about their keynote, we were doing our chart chat live session there and we were talking about a remake of one of the kind of existing graphics that was in the Wall Street Journal. So it
uh-huh,
was this
yeah,
bar chart looking at pricing pain. And
uh-huh,
it looked at kind of these bars and it looked at these two numbers. And the first thing Andy Cotgreave, one of my chart chat colleagues, said was, can you go ahead and scrape the data from this chat
mm-hmm,
GPT?
mm-hmm.
And so before we got to the place of asking it to build a chart, we said scrape the data. And what it could do is scrape the labels, but the
Interesting.
actual data
Yeah,
plotted, the length of the bars aren't
uh-huh,
values or numbers in terms of a price difference between 2 points in time. They're percentages. And so ChatGPT didn't make a column for percent change in the data set it created. And then once it went ahead and we asked it, or Andy asked it to go ahead and actually explain how to make a great chart and then build it, this was the chart it came up with.
I see.
We got some issues here, right? We've got like a mismatch here. We've got a purple and salmon legend, and then we've got this magenta salmon situation here. We've got 2024 and 2020 maybe overlapped against each other, but they're not narrow
Yeah,
enough to create a comparison, so they look stacked. We've got this strange kind of overlapping percent change, like secondary access situation. We've got rotated labels. Now, you could go ahead and sit there if you know good practices or use a special tool and say, please declutter this chart. Please go ahead and
yeah,
create greater gap spacing between the 2024 prices to
yeah,
better go ahead
yeah,
and show
yeah,
the
yeah,
overlap. Please
yeah,
do this. Please remove the dual axis. But I do think there's still a huge role for people to say, kind of, who is this chart communicating to, and what changes do I need to make this data more relevant and engaging in terms of what that
yeah.
looks like. And I mean, just going into the legend, right? The legend doesn't even match what's on the chart itself. So I really do think that there's
Yeah,
still a lot of space for humans to be not just kind of in the loop, but to be driving the decision making around the ways that we kind of plot and communicate data and information in ways that are
yeah,
accessible to different audiences, that are engaging and useful, and that we make meaningful and thoughtful design decisions. I mean, that's a huge part of what a lot of you all do in research is thinking about the consequences of those decisions and how people read and interpret and understand charts. And I still think people are fascinatingly complex, that we can't reduce them down and understand what they'll see in a chart without actually having broader conversations with different people and having those communication pieces.
yeah. I think one. So I've been playing with data analysis with ChatGPT. I actually published a post yesterday where I recorded myself doing data analysis with ChatGPT for almost an hour, and then I posted a few reflections on the experience. And I think what one of the main outcomes of doing that is that I think one of the biggest bottlenecks is verification, right?
Mm-hmm.
And more precisely, because so when ChatGPT or any other AI system produces a chart for you, right? If the chart is not optimal in the way it decided to map data to a visual representation, well, you'll see it, right? But what you don't see is the pre-processing part. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of like have to have a blind trust into the numbers that are mapped over there. And we know that these numbers can be totally wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very hard to verify. How do you actually verify? Right? It's interesting because this kind of question we didn't even used to ask it to more traditional tools, say like Tableau, right? Because you kind of know what kind of calculations you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
but well, it's interesting that I think there is a much more direct connection between what you tell the tool to do and what you expect it to do. But in with LLMs, you don't know. And verification is hard because I think right now the only way to verify is to check the code. So you can open a window and check, say, the Python code, what it's doing, but it's tedious and I think it doesn't scale to a very large segment of the population. So I think that's a really big issue, really really
Well,
big
you
issue.
said the word blind trust, right? That just word just like gives me like night sweats to
Chills.
think
Yeah,
about the words
yeah,
blind trusting something to tell me something. And it's a
yeah,
it's a tricky trade-off of how we look at speed and efficiency and what we
yeah,
gain in terms of speed and efficiency and access to information versus that kind of question about making data and information more usable, meaningful, verified, and trusted. It was interesting. I did a talk back in October, like right around the time of the State and Industry Survey for Chart Champ for a dashboard design contest about why dashboard developers are still relevant in an era of AI, and talked about the fact that, like, I mean, AI can enable us to have greater efficiency, enable new delivery mechanisms of accessing things like code-based approaches that maybe I, as a non-developer, wouldn't be able to access otherwise, and to
yeah,
allow us to go into data with greater depth sometimes because of the
yeah,
speed at which it can go through and look at qualitative information. On the flip side, you have these issues around meaning and usability and trust that come out from AI produced outputs that I think it's fair to say you'd want to know if there was an AI hand in developing or creating something. But I mean, when everything it seems like is starting to be fed by or touched by some kind of AI enablement bit, what share of the work has to be done by a person to make it their kind of owned property? And when you think about the attribution components of things too, when I ask a question, data can be verified, right? I mean, it might take time, but I can go look at and verify numbers on a chart in most cases, you'd hope. But when it comes to when an AI tool goes and looks at, I mean, reams and reams and reams of information and text information, I'm not going to have the time or the capability to go dive in and read all of that and verify it myself. And so the
Exactly.
question around kind of what information is informing that, where is their attribution? You see
Yeah.
ingestion of data sets. I read a post recently about kind of the use of Stack Overflow data, or now with the change in the terms of service, like Slack data from different private workspaces
Yeah, I saw that.
going into big LLMs, and the challenge of attribution too, that even something governed by a Creative Commons by attribution license, and I am not an IP expert, so I'm saying this out loud and want to give that big caveat. But the idea that if someone spent their time committing to actually working on a community-based project or forum that they understood would be governed under a certain set of terms. But now if I run a Google search and Google kind of pops up their AI generated snippet, it's not necessarily attributing that labor work or that expertise to me or that answer to
Sure.
me, which A,
Sure.
makes it less verifiable to go back to the primary source, and B, goes against some of the primary kind of agreements I entered into by committing my knowledge and expertise into that specific forum. So I think there's just a lot of questions now about what that looks like and how we use these tools. Not to say they're bad, but to say we should think about them and use them with caution and with some consideration that goes beyond just kind of the where can I use it that helps me, but also what might be the negative or unintended consequences, not just for me, but for the other people who have fed information into those spaces.
You just made me realize that the problem is way more complex than we think, right? Because the problem of how many levels of trust there are going from a phenomena that you want to study and then communicate and the outcome, right? Last year I taught a course, Northeastern, where I am, and I had a module on this idea of data reality gaps.
Mm.
That's something I borrowed from Ben Jones. He has this really nice way of describing the problem, and that's another problem, right? So you have we almost always start from existing data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or data that we gather somehow. And how do we know that this data reflects the reality that we want to communicate, right? And now
Well,
we have an
or the
additional layer
bias questions too, right? I mean, that sends me in
as
my
well.
mind to
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
Hans Rosling factfulness book and his factfulness quiz of like what your perception is of the world, and so much of it is
Yeah.
shaped by information, like people's perception of what life is like in a low income country, for example, being shaped by the
Yes,
pictures that they have
exactly.
seen.
Yeah.
And then I remember when I was doing some work in Botswana and was there for a few weeks and was on a video chat sitting at a cafe at a mall and chatting with my parents, and some older friend was with them, and they're just like, oh, there are malls in Botswana. And it was just this moment of being like, oh, absolutely. Yeah, there are
Of
malls in
course.
Botswana and nice restaurants. And it was just this reality gap between kind of all the pictures and images they'd seen were in the stylings of kind of out in the bush from National Geographic, and pictures of images from kind of different safaris versus what urban life might look like
Of course.
in a country or in one of the cities, like when I was in Gaborone. And it was just it's just one of those funny moments of that gap that I think speaks to also what we see more recently with research by folks like Eli Holder's work. I forget who his co-authors were, where he looked at that kind of perception gap of
Yes, he does
when
a
we
lot of
see a
this
bar
kind of
chart of
work. Yes.
averages, right?
Yes.
We assume
Yeah.
that everyone clusters around the end of the bar because that's our
Yeah.
assumption. And then we start deficit framing around kind of the ways in which this group must be better than this group. And it
Yes.
all
Yes.
sounds a little bit less impactful when you start looking at it from a like groups A, B, and C perspective, but start
Of
labeling
course.
those groups with race ethnicity groups, or in the work
Yes.
that I do on like HIV data, looking at key populations and looking at
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
highly discriminated against or stigmatized groups that are at high risk of HIV. And suddenly the stakes are higher in
Of
understanding the
course.
underlying distribution. And I think
Yeah.
of that in part because AI really is kind of synthesizing up and looking for the big picture patterns and key takeaways for us, which can be helpful sometimes, but is also lacking all of the additional, like just tacit knowledge that we have and bring to the table when we're looking at and interpreting information that can really get lost, or at least not be the priority thing that it talks about when it's trying to give us answers.
So I want to ask you one last thing, kind of like going back to the original question, and then we we'll wrap it up. What do you think of this terminology, human in the loop? Right? I know there are people. Do you know Ben Schneiderman? Have you heard of
Yeah,
him?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Ben Schneiderman,
He's in
famous
DC. He's
prophet.
down. Well, he's in
Yeah. Oh,
Maryland
of course,
technically,
of
but
course.
yeah,
He's
he's
in
great.
DC, and you are in DC. And Ben wrote this book. I actually have the book here. He wrote this book on
Hmm.
human-centered AI, and he's really big on this idea that we shouldn't use human in the loop. And he has these. What's the other terminology that he has? He has a bumper sticker: humans in the group and machine in the loop. I think that's
I
his
like it.
take. Humans in the group, machine in the loop. I think that's the right way. And yeah, what do you think about? I see problems with the idea of human in the loop,
Hmm.
and I'm curious to hear what you
Where, yeah,
think about
where are they in the loop? I have an issue with kind of where are humans in the loop, right? So I think I would agree with Ben on the not loving humans in the loop, because I think it kind of seeds that kind of driving, leading piece to something or someone else. I think we want to think about being thoughtful about, if you're going to talk about humans in the loop, where are they? And it should be in the whole loop, not just kind of tapping in at points of verification when we're
it. Yeah.
thinking about looking at, analyzing, understanding, and making decisions with data. Like when I think about a loop, I think about the data life cycle, kind of, right? Like
Yeah.
from like the
Yeah.
creation of data and information to the kind of storage and management, maintenance of it, over to the district, like analysis, visualization, and communication and use. And in that loop, that kind of data life cycle, there's a point and piece for kind of people to be touching each part of that process. And that should be
Mhm.
driving some of what happens in that process. And even starting from a place of the initial planning and gathering of information, not just kind of looking at secondary or available data. I think about all the ways in which we as people can actually make more thoughtful decisions around what data and information we collect that's meaningful. I go back to
Mhm.
kind of the
Mhm.
burden of time that goes with data collection. And if I'm asking a woman to sit at her house and answer questions about maternal and child health for 2, 3, 4 hours, about like the lengthy process through which all of her children arrived in this world and all these different bits and pieces, I should have a plan for how I'm going to use that data and why I'm asking each of those questions.
Of
And I
course.
feel like having humans in the loop, starting from the place of thinking about what data we need, how we collect that data, and then what is kind of the process that governs and we go through the process of using that data. I mean, humans being in the driver's seat of that question asking process, setting those initial hypotheses, setting out those analysis goals, and thinking about how those goals kind of tie to some kind of meaningful action is really powerful. And in my mind, really empowering for the continued role of people as part of this data analysis, visualization, and communication process. And so I hope that we can think more about humans being not just in a loop, but in the driver's seat of what's happening. And think about the ways in which maybe AI will help us be better critical thinkers and question askers in some ways. I mean, to
Mhm.
make the
Mhm.
best use of these big tools, you need to be good at kind of prompting and asking questions, though they'll certainly get better and better over time. But part of it is kind of knowing what the right question is to ask. And I go back to the very
Ah.
Socratic parenting methods of my father in terms of turning any kind of question I asked to him or asked for help on back to a question to me to help me reason out my own answers, which I think maybe maybe AI will help people do that a little bit more. I can only
I
dream,
like this
right?
idea. I like this idea a lot. Yes. And yeah, maybe these tools can help us being a little less certain when we shouldn't be.
I
I think
mean,
that's a great idea.
ChatGPT tries to tell you when you log in, trust and verify, make sure you're using this with caution.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
I'm not sure how often that really happens when the speed to information is so fast, and the speed with which we're willing to share information also is so fast.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for jumping on a call such a short notice. I hope to see you in Chicago in a few weeks at the Outlier
Yes,
conference.
I'm so
I definitely
excited.
want to come this time, and I want to meet many people.
Ah, I'm so
And
excited. It's going to be
and
such a great event. Well, yeah, I mean, the speakers this year are such an amazing range, from folks
yes,
talking
the
about
lineup
like
is
the
fantastic.
hyperwall at NASA all the way over to someone talking about data in the context of Formula One and McLaren racing, over to
Yeah.
someone talking about data in a health and healthcare context. And I know for me, I love these kind of single stream conferences that are at a size and scale that I can connect with people, I can engage with folks in interesting conversations, and I end up listening to talks that I would otherwise maybe not go walk into in a
Of
room. Like
course.
Tableau
Yeah.
conference is big, going back to Tableau conference. You can't go to everything. And
Yeah.
so you go to the things that you know have some relevance to you. But what I found at places like our outlier conferences or back in the day going to Tapestry, you get to go ahead and hear from people and hear about topics that seemingly have no connection to your work, but ultimately you learn some really interesting thing about that really broadens the way you think about something or think about the world or just your knowledge and awareness of other spaces. So I am so excited about Outlier. So excited to have you there, Enrico.
Well, see you soon.
All right,
Thanks
we'll
so
see you
much.
soon. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.